Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. When I first heard about it, I'm like, Natalie, I don't know. If this is some type of witchcraft. I don't
It's
think
weird.
this.
It's weird.
I said,
No, it's weird.
yeah,
No,
because I'm
trust
like,
me.
Natalie, listen. I said, there's no way this
When the
stuff.
food sensitivity test came back, there wasn't enough ink. There wasn't enough room on the page for the ink that was needed for how allergic he was to broccoli.
Oh, really?
Broccoli, and the mom's like, we stuff him full of broccoli because it's broccoli. It's good for you, right? Well,
oh no!
it takes and I kind of laughed a little bit, and she goes, "What's so funny?" And I said, "Well, neurofeedback can't make your kid do homework, but when he chooses to do the homework, it's going to help a heck of a lot more than if he chooses not to."
Oh God, brain fart!
Mm-hmm.
I did have a brain fart.
I know something that can help with that.
I do have an appointment.
Listen, Adrian, tell her.
It just looks like something weird when you're putting sensors on somebody's head.
It does, and Ian was like, you can try it. I don't think it's going to work, but you can go ahead.
Listen, if you want me to be a spokesman for you, just tell me in 2 seconds, and I'll do it. Listen, man. When I came to you, my brain was all over the place. Just very fog and just. All right, go now.
Oh my God! Hey guys, welcome to the Family Mess. I'm Noah, and have a nice day. Good God!
I love the Family Mess. Oh.
Welcome to the Family Mess podcast. I'm your host Ian, and this is my wife and co-host Natalie. The Family Mess, the podcast about life with kids and all things adulting. Let's talk. Well, today on the Family Mess, it looks like my co-host Natalie is not here. And I told her about this podcast 2 weeks ago when it was scheduled, and I told her to write it down. I said, Adrian's a very busy man. His schedule is packed, and we have to do this as soon as we can. He actually booked us for an hour to do the podcast, so you got to be here. And she told me, Ian, I'll be here. Don't worry, I'll be here. So I get up this morning about 8, do a quick errand, come back. Her car's gone, so I'm thinking she went to the store to get food. She's at work. doing an errand. Oh my gosh, doing an errand at work. So I will be conducting the show today by myself, which is fine. If Natalie comes in later, she comes in later. And we were supposed to do a 5-minute of pound segment. We'll have to pass that. I am not going to do any current events because Natalie's not here to segue them in, and she's the segue queen. So we're going to go directly into the introduction today and get into the show. So today we have Adrian, I don't know your last name. We have my friend.
We've known each other for like 20 years, and I don't think you still know my last name.
My friend Adrian. We played soccer. Oh my gosh, we played soccer. I can't remember in the 90s. Oh God, and we were on the same team, and it's crazy how we met up years later. My son Noah was getting this brain mapping done. And Natalie goes, hey, there's this doctor across town. Make sure you're here. And I'm staying there, and I go into this building, and I see Adrian come out. And I just look at him. I'm like, oh, that's Adrian. Like, you know what I'm saying? Immediately, my mind knew who you were. Yeah. And I was like, I think that's him. And you kind of looked at me.
Oh, yeah. You haven't changed a bit, man. You've aged like fine wine.
I appreciate it, man. But Adrian was helping my son. My son was having ADHD issues, and he was recommended to us from another doctor. And when I saw him, I felt really good because I'm like, oh well, if it's this guy, then he's got. I just felt good knowing somebody was helping my kid. And, that was really good. So could you give them a brief introduction, Adrian, about who you are and, pretty much.
Yeah, happy to do it. First of all, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I know you guys put a lot of work into this, and I'm just grateful to be here. So let me dive right in. So we're going to talk about brain mapping and neurofeedback, and that's a very new subject, very new topic for a lot of people. Most people, when I talk to them, they've never heard of it, or they look at me like I've got monkeys on my face or something. Like, what is he talking about? But basically, so my background is in mental health. So this is my beginning of July is going to be 24 years that I've been doing neurofeedback and brain mapping. But the way that I got started, I was in a neuropsychology class at UCF. Go Knights! Got to plug my school, man. It's a lot. This goes out to the world. I got to let people know that I went to UCF.
Oh, for real.
So basically, I was in a neuropsych class, and the professor was talking about everything in the brain. It's a neuropsychology is a study of the brain, what happens when you injure a specific part of the brain, and how your body recovers or what goes missing. So if you damage this part of your brain, what happens specifically? And so as we're studying this, one of the topics was EEG, and EEG is the electrical impulses that the brain puts off, and you can use sensors to listen to those brain waves. And so in the late 1960s, actually, one of the first brainwaves was recorded back in the 1940s, which is kind of crazy that they recorded a brainwave back then. But in the 1960s, the equipment got refined, and there was a group of doctors that were just taking brainwave recordings of people. So over time, the recordings were being matched up and paired with standardized psychological testing, which was, you've got tons of different tests out there. Like you've got the WISC, the WACE, the MMPI, the Halstead Raytan, Lurie, Nebraska. These are all psychological test batteries and neuropsych test batteries that pretty much test like different parts of your brain. So they can test your writing skills, memory skills, figure decoding, sequence decoding, procedurals decoding, all these things that your brain does simultaneously to kind of receive information from the outside environment and from the surrounding environment to then process it and make sense of it, which is what becomes our reality. So all these brainwaves are involved in regulating up and regulating down a lot of the filters and the activity in the area specific to what part of the brain is being used for what specific task. So every part of the brain has a specific job, and every one of those brains that is being recorded or monitored has a specific job too. So if you have too much or not enough of one brainwave, it can cause a disruption in any one of those areas in the brain. So by looking at a brain map, we can basically digitally decode the brain in three-dimensional models and look at which parts of the brain are producing too much, which ones are producing not enough. And the databases are so robust now. My database that we use specifically was developed by my mentor, Dr. Richard Suter. If you want to look into him, you can just go to newmindcenter.com. They're in Atlanta, Georgia. But Dr. Suter's been a pioneer in the field. He's been my mentor for the past, 17 years. And he's a keynote speaker at many of the conferences. He's written books on the topic. He's the developer of the database system that we use, developer of the hardware software that we use. So this is like the guru of neurofeedback, in my opinion. So I've learned from him, and he's the guy that taught me everything I know. And I've been kind of riding his coattails for the last, couple decades. And here I am now, doing this, as a solo practitioner. And my background's in mental health. So I have, undergraduate and graduate degrees in clinical psychology. So this made sense to me back then that studying psychology, studying the brain, if you can read the brain waves and understand what's happening with somebody, then the counterpart to that is the neurofeedback. So the way that the neurofeedback works is we take all those brain waves, we run them through the database kicks back a report. The report tells us these 4 areas or these top 4 areas statistically are the most abnormal, quote unquote abnormal. And then we just place sensors over those areas and we bring the people back. So in your case, it was Noah. Noah was coming in. He was sitting down. He was watching a movie. And when his brain waves moved into the right patterns that we know statistically they should be in for those areas, it caused the screen to brighten up. And then what happens is that over time, the brain learns how to control the brightness on the screen. And that's what we call operant conditioning. So we pair a stimulus, which is the movie screen, and we pair it with a positive reward, which is a bright screen. But then we also tell the brain, if you produce the wrong patterns, you're going to get quote unquote punished. And that punishment comes by a dark screen. So over time, the brain learns how to control the brightness on the screen by avoiding the dark screen by producing only the correct brainwave patterns. And that's how neurofeedback works.
I got to tell you, I'm not going to lie, man. The first time Natalie told me about this, we had another doctor we were seeing, and Noah kind of saw her for several sessions, and she kind of just, it didn't go anywhere. It started good, but when we went back for more, we had to go towards the medicine route, and Natalie wasn't comfortable with that. So yeah, I'm not gonna lie. When I first heard about it, I'm like, Natalie, I don't know if this is some type of witchcraft. I don't.
It's
think
weird. It's weird.
I said,
no, it's weird.
Yeah, because I'm like, Natalie, listen. I said, there's no way this stuff. And I'm an engineer, so I believe in science. Science. Yeah. I'm a very techie guy, so I'm all into any type of science. But when she told me about this, I'm like, oh hell no, because you don't hear that much about it. You know what I mean? You hear about other things in the brain, but when it comes to what you're saying, like you never hear anyone really, even in the media, or anyone really talking about it. So that's why I was like, well, there's no way this is going to work. But we were at the end of the rope with Noah trying to get him figured out. And I'm telling you, man, I'm not going to lie, man, you've made me a believer just seeing Noah a complete 180 by just seeing it. Because at first, I swear I thought it was just him just improving over time.
Yeah.
with his grades and his sports. I'm like, well, that's just him growing up. But I'm wrong, man. I think those sessions worked. I just can't believe it worked that good.
Well, it's your biggest hangup was the science part, and what unfortunately is that there's so much data and so much science behind it, but it's not put out because, and I'm not a conspiracy theory guy like by any means, but we're competing directly with pharmaceuticals. So
oh yeah,
we get a lot of flack. I mean, I've been at conferences for neurofeedback, and there's pharmaceutical people there at the conferences because they're learning about neurofeedback, wondering why is this working so well, and what is it that it's doing, and who are we competing with? So when you got people from like big pharmaceutical companies coming to your conferences, you know that you've gotten their attention. So,
oh yeah. I mean, huge. I mean, because anything with mental,
performance,
anything, pharmaceuticals want in on that. They want to control everything. So if anything else comes in, that's kind of, can get into that with them. They're just like, what is this happening?
Yeah,
here? Because
And I'm that guy that believes that medication has its place. I really do. I mean, because you hear about it in different documentaries and different people talking about it. But I mean, we are like the leaders in the world in taking care of people if you get banged up on the highway. I mean, critical care, triage. Like, I mean, we're excellent at that. We can patch people up quickly.
Yep.
Where we struggle is in chronic conditions. Diabetes, like cancer, like heart disease, like mental health. I mean, those are things that we do it very differently than the rest of the world. But if you go travel around the world, you hear about neurofeedback everywhere. In Europe, especially in Germany and Poland, I mean, this is stuff that's being done because it's cutting edge neuroscience. And neuroscience is one of the biggest frontiers that we know that the most complex chemical factory and pharmacy in the world is inside our heads. So, I mean, we look at the brain as something that we use every day to day. We deal with our stress. We deal with our anxiety. We deal with depression. We deal with conditions like fibromyalgia, chronic pain, epilepsy, seizures. All these things are things that are originating from the brain in some way or another, whether it's the brain or it's the gut, because the gut is such a big connecting factor to this too. And that if you have people that are doing neurofeedback and they're struggling, one of the first things that I ask people is, what's your diet like? Are you eating foods that are inflammatory? Are you eating exposing yourself to toxins? Have you had a lot of mercury in your diet from eating like canned foods? What is the level? What are the levels of toxicity you've been exposed to? And that causes inflammation. And most of the big research right now, especially in cardiac health, is about inflammation, because inflammation causes the body to go into a repair mode that it goes crazy. So like if you get a cut on your hand, that turns red, and that's inflammation. That's healthy. You're rebuilding and kind of helping the body regenerate and recuperate. But when you get inflammation in the gut, there's so many neurotransmitters that are made in your gut, serotonin and dopamine. These are half of them. Half of them are made in the gut. So if you got inflammation in the gut, the first thing that stops is neurotransmitter production. Then you've got nutrient absorption issues, and you got all kinds of crazy things. Well, guess what? Your brain's dependent on nutrition. Your brain's dependent on neurotransmitters. So if these are things that are being affected, we typically, when we get through neurofeedback, we can see the process in which someone's responding to and how they're responding. And if they're doing well, we typically know that they're pretty well balanced. But if they're not, then we've got ways to look at that through cytokine testing, inflammatory testing, IgG, IgE markers that we can test for, food sensitivities, food allergies, environmental toxins and allergies. Those are all things that are super critical to know when you're doing anything. You're starting a medication program, or you're starting a diet, or one of the first things they tell you before you start a diet is to do a detox. Why do you have to detox? Because if you don't detox, you can't put nutrients and toxins in the same cell. Got to get rid of the toxins. So that's why these things are so important. And I'm the brain guy, but I'm talking about all this other stuff because the brain is the recipient of all these things that if they're not well balanced, you're not going to get a good response in the brain.
You know what? I wish more people would talk about that and approach problems from that perspective. But man, you just don't hear a lot of that. And it's frustrating because you are right. A lot of problems, probably could be solved by just making that connection between the gut and the brain, but you don't hear that?
Oh, we had a kid come into our office one time, and he was coming in for ADD. The parents were like, "We're doing brain mapping, we're doing neurofeedback, we're going to do your neurotransmitter testing to figure out what's going on with this kid." And I was like, "Have we done any type of like food sensitivity or allergy testing?" Because I heard him, he was like stuffy, like all the time. And they're like, "No, we really haven't." I was like, "You know what? I'm going to pull myself out of the equation for a minute. Let's test him. Let's look at some food sensitivity testing." When the food sensitivity test came back, there wasn't enough ink. There wasn't enough room on the page for the ink that was needed for how allergic he was to broccoli.
Oh, really?
Broccoli. And the mom's like, "We stuff him full of broccoli because it's broccoli. It's good for you, right?" Well,
oh no.
It takes about 2 weeks for the inflammation to reduce, or for the IgG or the IgE markers to drop, or the inflammatory markers to drop off. Or excuse me, the anaphylaxis or the inflammatory markers to drop. Once those things dropped, ADD was gone. He never needed brain mapping or neurofeedback.
Oh my God.
ADD went away. It was completely gone. It was all inflammation related. And I was like happy for them, because I'm like, you guys just saved yourself like so much time.
Yeah.
And they were so blown away that I would suggest that in lieu of doing neurofeedback and pushing that on them. But it's like, for me, we just had another patient come into the office that didn't quite understand what she was getting herself into with neurofeedback. Yes. And I told her, you're better suited seeing Dr. D'Antonio here, because Dr. D'Antonio at Whole Family Healthcare in Winter Park is just one of the most amazing physicians I've ever met in my entire life. I mean, I bring my 10-year-old to see him, which, if that tells you anything you need to know about my confidence and faith in him.
No, he's good. He's real good.
He's awesome. So, but I mean, to your point, like the science behind it, there's robust science now on neurofeedback. There's actually there's a study. I'm going to send you a link for your viewers to look into. But the American Academy of Pediatrics, a few years back, they put neurofeedback as a stage 1 intervention, and they based it off of this study that was done, that they looked at. It was a meta-analysis of 16 neurofeedback studies that showed, this is evidence-based studies. These are double-blind. Some of them were double-blind controlled experimental studies that showed that neurofeedback did as good or better than medication therapy. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics was like, if that works for that, we're going to put it as a stage 1 intervention, which is their highest recommendation.
Wow.
I mean, this is the American Academy of Pediatrics. I mean, it's a very well trusted, very well known.
Yes.
Pediatricians. If you're on the board, if you're a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics, like you know what you're doing, right? Or you're supposed to know what you're doing.
Yeah. You got credentials if you're on that, definitely.
Right.
But
So the studies are out there. The evidence is out there. The studies specifically are done by large consortiums, and they wanted to know, because there was a big uproar about, neurofeedback is research and experimental, like it's not really established well enough. And all the people that do neurofeedback got sick and tired of that and said, well, you know what? The medical model really isn't robust in its own methods of testing. And so they did their own, and they had third-party people. I'm telling you, 16 different studies, all compiled into one meta-analysis of a study. And it's there. The evidence is there.
Now, I got to go back to something that you said earlier. You said that Europe and other parts of the world have been doing neurofeedback for a long time. Why is it that the United States is so far behind? Is it because of the big pharmaceuticals that have so much of a control? Is that the main reason? Because it seems like the rest of the world knows this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed question, and I guess there really isn't a simple answer. But we in the Western world rely very heavily on allopathic. So we rely very heavily on medication therapy for everything. And then you hear the saying, there's a pill for every ill, and that's allopathic medicine. Most other countries, they look at the health system as a whole. They look at it holistically. Holistic medicine got a really bad rap here in the U.S. because you had a lot of people that didn't have the right credentials, that were kind of taking weekend seminars and certificates that are done online and calling it holistic medicine. But real holistic medicine is done by trained, like naturopaths, integrative physicians and medical doctors. Like we at Whole Family, we have actually at Whole Family where I'm at one of the offices, we have 2 medical doctors on staff that practice integrative and functional medicine. They're not practicing. They will prescribe medication when it's appropriate, but there are really good medications out there. Like one of them is like metformin. Metformin is fantastic. It's one of the most studied and stable, well-used medications for regulating blood sugar, and metformin is fantastic.
Really?
And you see doctors. Yeah.
I've never heard of that. Oh my gosh, metformin.
Yep,
Oh.
metformin has been around forever, and it's widely used, and it's very stable, and it's very, and things like that. Even, some doctors will even tell you that there's issues, and I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm speaking from experience and from anecdotal stuff that I've talked with other doctors about. But things like statin drugs, there's a mixed bag about statin drugs and how some people don't benefit from statin drugs, and it can cause issues with your muscles. But it is very well known that statin drugs stabilize like plaques in arteries. And so those are things that you kind of have to decide whether you want to trade it off or on. Now, when it comes to neurofeedback, it's a whole different bag because we're dealing with stimulant medication like Adderall, like Ritalin.
Definitely.
Which you don't hear about Ritalin too much more because it got some bad reviews later on, as we found out that Ritalin, from what I've understood and what I've been told, really works on similar receptors to what drugs like cocaine work on because they're stimulants, right? So what we found out that later on was kids that have been using Ritalin or had been using Ritalin for many, many years are now abusing stimulant drugs like cocaine, like amphetamines, like all kinds of other stuff because they've gotten used to it. So I know that there's several drug clinics out there that use Ritalin to help cocaine addicts get weaned off of cocaine, which is scary that's what we're using on for kids.
So we're using a stimulant to get them off of stimulant.
Yeah. So again, this is all stuff that you hear out there. I don't know if the studies back it up or not, but it makes sense to me. I don't know that's the case. But the reason that it's not done again is I don't think that pharmaceutical companies are evil corporations. I think that they're organizations that have shareholders, and then the companies have to respond to the shareholders. And so in a lot of cases, they're really putting drugs and out in the market space that have only been tested on several hundred people. And they only have to pass 2 out of 3 studies that show that it works better than placebo. And then you get a license to put a drug out into the market space. Perfect example is kind of, and not to go on a crazy tangent here, but
here we go.
It is. Right now we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we're using a vaccine that is being administered on an emergency order. It's not FDA approved yet. So that's the way that we operate here. We are quick to getting things out there. We want the quick fix. Neurofeedback is not the quick fix. Neurofeedback is something that the brain has to learn how to do it, has to reprogram, has to be taught, and then it has to retain it. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking for a quick fix, neurofeedback is not always a quick fix. But here's the difference. When you stop doing neurofeedback, your brain's learned a new behavior. When you stop taking medication, the brain goes back to what it was doing before it was taking medication.
Yeah, that's correct. But hold on a second, Adrian. My lovely co-host has decided to come and join us for the show. Welcome, Natalie.
I had a work thing, I had a work thing. It's not like I was out just, twiddling my thumbs.
Oh, I love this. I love it.
But I had a quick question for you. Hey there, Adrian.
Now the show begins.
Hey, how are you? Good to hear your voice.
I'm good. I had a question about what you said about retainage. Like, so how is it retained, or how do you retain what the neural?
So it's a learned behavior. So simple learning technique. So if you burn your hand on a stove, your brain learns very quickly not to put your hand on a hot stove again. Actually, even if it's a cold stove, your brain will say, hey, that's dangerous. That's classical conditioning. That's pairing a stimulus and a response. So that's the way that the brain learns. The other way the brain learns is through operant conditioning. And there's several different ways of training the brain, but these are 2 of the most well-known. A good example of operant conditioning is you get into your car, you drive off, and you don't buckle your seatbelt. What does the car do?
It makes that noise reminding you
that horrid, terrible noise that you like.
Damn it, shut up.
So over time, what happens is that your brain really doesn't like that sound. So when you get into the car, you buckle your seatbelt before you even turn the key because you want to avoid that sound. That's an operant condition. So your brain learns how to avoid negative stimuli by producing specific patterns and specific behaviors to elicit the proper response as a reward. So if you buckle your seatbelt before you turn your car on, your reward is you don't have to hear that sound.
So it's
a learned behavior.
So you're not really buckling to save yourself. You're buckling because your brain said, "I'm annoyed. I don't want to be annoyed."
Correct. You're avoiding. Yeah, it's avoiding the negative stimulus. Same thing as like when you're driving a car, or you work to get a paycheck. You work to get a paycheck because you want the reward of the financial freedom. If you don't work and you the negative consequence or the negative reward from that is that you don't have the money and you hate that. So you try to avoid not having money by going to work. The way that the brain does neurofeedback is that once it recognizes, because remember, this is in science, if you go, even if you go like on 2020 or 60 Minutes and you start looking at some of these things that are done, the way that neurofeedback works is it's a brain computer interface. So look up BCI, brain computer interface. This is a form of brain computer interface. So your brain is literally connected to the hardware and the software and is getting direct feedback of itself. Once the brain recognizes itself and it knows that this is a mirror image of its own brain waves, it can modulate and regulate them. Because it's kind of like when you're on a heart rate monitor. If you breathe regularly, you kind of create a smooth in and out breathing pattern. You increase what's called heart coherence. And there's a ton of stuff out there on heart rate variability, HRV. So if you guys want to look that up, HRV is a pretty amazing new way of kind of de-stressing the body, because you can override a lot of these autonomic nervous system responses to stress by simply breathing. It's what yogis do. It's what Tibetan monks do.
I mean,
it's
yeah.
So breathing,
really? Just breathing.
Yeah, when I get like worked up, if I feel like I'm stressed, I stop and I just take like 4 or 5 really deep breaths.
Yep. Yep. You look up heart rate variability, and there's a cool little device called, it's by the HeartMath Institute. So if you go to heartmath.com, there's a little device that you can clip to your ear that picks up your heart rhythms. And they teach you basically, when you breathe in, your heart rate speeds up and increases. When you exhale, your heart rate decreases. And over time, it looks like this beautiful up and down sine wave going across the screen. When you get into that high heart coherence pattern, vasodilation happens, adrenal responses lowers, you activate parasympathetic nervous systems, which is the healing part of the nervous system. Yeah, absolutely. And the studies are there. And what they found out, it's a study in a field. The field is called neurocardiology, and they study the connection between the brain and the heart. And what these guys found out is that there's more connections going from the heart to the brain than there is from the brain to the heart. Everyone thought it was the opposite. But the heart, which is why heart transplants work, because there's an intrinsic brain that goes with that heart that learns and understands. Yeah, it's so cool. And all you got to do is go to the HeartMath Institute or look up HeartMath. There's a whole field behind it that people typically, and the sensor's only like $150 for like an iPhone. You plug it in and you can use it anywhere. It's awesome. But that's all related to brainwave function too, because your brain waves, when you're in that high heart coherence, your brain moves into more what we call an alpha state. Alpha states are when the brain is relaxed and idling and not engaging, but just kind of like in neutral. And that's when you see that. So sympathetic nervous system modes are fight or flight modes, right? Parasympathetic is the opposite. It's the healing part. So hopefully when you're sleeping, you're in a parasympathetic state. You're recuperative sleep. Your body regenerates. RNA, DNA repair happens. I mean, all this stuff is when your body heals and repairs. But we live very stressful lives. And that's why stress is such a big killer, because your body can never get into that parasympathetic state to heal from all the damage that the stress has done. So by getting your brain to produce more calm rhythmic patterns, it matches up with your heart, it lowers stress response, vasodilation happens, hypertension reduces. I mean, it's all connected. You're one whole body. You're not a bunch of different parts that are just doing their own thing. They're all connected.
So I'm kind of late to this whole conversation. So I'm sorry.
You were working.
I'm
it's
sorry
okay.
I missed the beginning, but I definitely, as a mother, and partly why I really wanted to talk to you and have you on the show. Did you guys talk about like the basics of how it helps and
yes, Adrian went over that at the beginning of the show.
Okay,
and
so you talked about like anxiety and.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit, but I mean, I can elaborate on it. I mean, so if you think about like all these different brain states, so anxiety, beta is a fast frequency. When you have too much beta in certain parts of your brain, it can cause overexcitation, and we call overarousal, which is what stress states are. So anxiety, same thing, high stress state, high beta output, and it's pretty classic, pretty easy to see on a brain map. ADD. Theta is a frequency that's involved with shifting the brain. So I use car analogies a lot because people get that. So beta is like your gas pedal. And then you have alpha, which is like neutral, like you're kind of in neutral, not doing really anything, just sitting there idling. And then you have theta. Theta is kind of like the clutch and the stick shift. When your brain shifts from thought to thought to thought, it uses theta to gather memories from different parts of the brain to fractionate it back into a memory. It also is helpful in binding memories. Too much theta in the front causes your brain to bounce around all over the place and you can't focus on one thing. That's what typically ADD looks like in the brain. Classic ADD is too much theta in the front part of the brain. And then you have delta. Delta is a frequency that's very well known. People think that theta or delta happens when you're asleep, but your highest amount of delta happens when you're in an awake, alert state. Delta's job is to suppress and or inhibit the cortex. And if you think about it, that's kind of weird, but at the same time, if you don't have enough delta, then everybody would be schizophrenic. The brain spends the majority of its energy putting the brakes on, because if it didn't, the brakes would be off and we'd be flying downhill with no control.
So is that part of that having the...
That's what I feel like doing most days.
Yeah.
So that's part of having like with the anxiety. So can neuro... Okay, so like I know only because I talk to people, and when I explain what neurofeedback and I explain it in very layman dumb people terms because I don't know all the details. But people are always like curious to know, because I say, oh, my son has ADHD and he got neurofeedback to help with his brain. And then someone even told me that because I have like cravings, I could even do neurofeedback to help with like my with my cravings. Is that true?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you guys so many links here, but if you go to the isnr.org, they have a bibliography of things that neurofeedback has been studied for. So you have things like obsessive compulsive disorder, eating disorders, addictions, chronic pain, epilepsy, fibromyalgia, attention deficit disorder, anxiety disorders. I mean, the list is like, it's such a big list.
Is that like, hold on, you said is that like Indigo, Sam, Nancy, Ray? Is that ISNR?
Correct. Yep. isnr.org. And you'll see, I don't know where exactly it is, but if you do isnr.org/comprehensive-bibliography, I think is what the URL is. It'll take you directly to that bibliography, and on the right-hand side, you'll see the list of conditions, and you can click on any one of them, and it'll cite all of the latest or any valid studies that were done using neurofeedback as an intervention for that condition.
Right, and then did you guys discuss how neurofeedback is done, like how it's non-invasive and all that?
We touched upon it a little bit, but yeah, I get one of the biggest questions I get is are you going to shock me? Because you see wires and you going. No, so thank you for bringing that up, Natalie. Because no, it's 100% non-invasive. All the systems and all the wires, all the sensors that we're using are being used to listen to brainwaves. We're not putting anything in. There are some things out there that use micropulse or micro. I forget what they call it. Microderm. Was it microderm? It's basically tiny impulses that they use to stimulate different parts or different things. This is not that. Neurofeedback is 100% non-invasive. People do ask about side effects. It's hard to call them side effects because at the end of the day, they're positive things that come of it. But one of the things that we notice a lot, especially with kids, is that, especially if dealing with like oppositional defiant disorders or depression or things like that, when neurofeedback starts to work, if you can imagine that delta is the brakes, right? And delta, another way we describe delta is like fog, right? So if you have too much fog and neurofeedback lowers the fog and you can see through the fog, sometimes what happens with kids is that they are stuck in this negative rumination pattern, which rumination is basically repetitious thinking, repetitious talk. Sometimes it's negative by nature because we're negative creatures, right? We always think badly. Seldom do we think positively. But what happens is you have kids sometimes that are so stuck in this negative thinking pattern, and then you lower the fog or you lift the fog, and then they can hear the negative self-talk. Sometimes they don't like what they hear. And so neurofeedback sometimes can cause kids after the first 10 sessions to become relatively emotional. And a parent will say to me, neurofeedback is making my kid worse. And I go, why? They're like, oh, he's crying all the time. He's talking back. He's just having these weird thoughts about stuff all the time and bringing it up. And my response is, that's fantastic. Your child is expressing himself. Your child is talking about the things that are bothering him. Your child is feeling the feelings. I mean, that's what we want our kids to learn. We don't want kids to be numb and stunted to their feelings and thoughts, which is another chief complaint that medication therapy does, is that it turns kids to zombies. They become numb to their thinking and their thought process. But if you have a child who's learning and can learn to grow into that skill set, Dr. Alicia Bracci, who's one of my favorite school psychologists. She's another one of our partners at the Center for Health, Learning, and Achievement in Lake Mary.
Yes, I have an appointment. Actually, I called her the other day to get my kid an appointment. He needs help with executive functioning stuff. So yeah, I'm familiar with her.
Here we go.
She might recommend neurofeedback to you, just saying.
Well, I'm going to tell her, been there, done that. She's already done it. So.
But Dr. Braccia has a really great way of explaining this. And she says that when kids have this response that they become emotional, they never really had the tools in the toolbox to deal with that emotion or that feeling or that thought because they've never felt it before. So if you can teach a child, which is where her office is fantastic because they have people that can go into the home or work with the children individually or the parents and teach them some life skills, some home skills, and they have counseling and therapy as well too, which they're phenomenal because they're school based. So they do, and then they can do home stuff too. But these are things that neurofeed. So I had a parent one time. I'll never forget this. Her kid's going through neurofeedback, and she calls me up one day. And she's like, "This isn't working." And I go, "Oh well, I'm sorry to hear that. What's happening?" And she goes, "Well, when he does his homework, he gets it done like in an hour and a half. But when he doesn't do his homework because he doesn't want to do his homework, it takes him like 6 hours to get them to do his homework." And I kind of laughed a little bit. And she goes, "What's so funny?" And I said, "Well, neurofeedback can't make your kid do homework, but when he chooses to do the homework, it's going to help a heck of a lot more than if he chooses not to."
I like
so
that.
Now we're talking about behavioral stuff, not brain stuff, behavioral stuff. I do recognize and realize that behaviors and choices are made in the brain. But I mean, it's just one of those things that you have to, in the home, you have to develop, reward cycles, and there has to be consequences, and there has to be reinforcements for kids to do things. And there has to be, Dr. Sean Jennings, who's one of my favorite therapists, he taught me and showed me the freedom versus responsibility scale. So when you have a child that doesn't really want to do a lot of stuff and they don't want to take on responsibility, that's fine. But the freedom marker drops off too. If they take on more responsibility and they choose to take on more responsibility, then the reward dial goes up as well too. And it's an equal exchange of freedom versus responsibility. And that's something that is a behavioral trait that can be taught. Can neurofeedback help with that? Absolutely, because if you're able to integrate and process that information better by way of teaching the brain how to integrate and process information better through neurofeedback, then yes, it's going to help behavioral stuff. So neurofeedback is very complementary to things like acupuncture, to behavioral therapy, to cognitive behavioral therapy. I mean, all these things that are involved with the brain learning, even tutoring improves, and you see kids, their test scores improve, their attention improves, and all these things improve over time, and we get better results because we've created a more efficient brain.
Right. So, Ian, have you talked about our son and his results?
Oh yeah, that was like the first 15 minutes. Adrian and I were talking about that, but I told Adrian I thought it was witchcraft when I first heard about it, and I didn't.
I still get that.
I don't believe this crap. But then I became a patient. Remember?
Well, yes, you decided to do it. Yeah. I've known about this for a while.
Yeah.
We did it years ago. I think because my son,
I told
puberty kind of phased out a little bit, some of the effects. But for me, it's like medication was not an option for me. Like I just, and everyone pushed it so hard. Like my own personal therapist pushed me to medicate my child. And I know this runs in my family. So, and I'm like, you know what? It runs in my family, but we're able to manage and cope. And right. I really felt like this was something that would be better. And that's why I had to wait till I got some money. Cause I was like, I got to save up. This is for me. Yes, it's expensive, but either I could do, medication for 18, 20 years, or I can make the investment now and pay that money now to help him longer and not have to get medication and to be able just to learn other ways like exercise, fish oils, other things that will help the brain instead of medicating him. And that's why, and I'm very thankful that we were able to find you and for the help that you've given my son, because you've kind of brought him back. And he went.
Noah's an awesome kid. And I tell people, I just put sensors on people's heads. They got to do the work. And Noah was a hard worker. I mean, he plowed through it. I wanted to touch on something real quick because you brought up a really good point. Your decision was you were given a choice. So if you have, let's say, a 4 or 5 year old child and you're being pushed to medicate, and you decide to go the medication route over that time frame until they reach the age of 18, this is a report that was done by the CDC. This isn't me. The CDC put out a report saying that if you medicate a child from the age of 4 to the age of 18, all of the direct and indirect costs for that are roughly, ready, $36,000. That's medication, that's time and travel, that's loss of work. Those, like, again, direct and indirect costs. The cost of neurofeedback for 30 sessions is roughly 1/10 of that. And it is typically, which most of the big studies out that show 80% involvement in the studies that are following people post 16 years are saying that it's a permanent change. So the investment, yes, you're going to spend 1/10 roughly about of that $36,000, but the effects in it becomes permanent. Again, with medication therapy, you stop at any point in time during those 14 years of medicating the person, all the symptoms come back.
Right. Yeah. And two, some kids don't want to medicate. Like, I have a nephew. He is just like, actually a couple of nephews. You're not drugging me, blah, 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 which is fine. I'm like, but I like, this is an option for him. I told his mom, like, this is something that you could do for him that will help him, to get better grades and to clear some of that fog in his brain, without the drugs. And all he's got to do is go sit, 45 minutes, however long, for the time, a couple of times a week for, over a period of weeks. And he can have, dramatic changes. And so I don't know, people sometimes are afraid, or they just don't know. And one thing I describe it when I talk to other moms or people about it is I basically say it's like an EKG on your brain. And because people always know the EKG, how it goes, everyone knows the EKG, what it does with your heart, right? And I always describe it as an EKG for your brain, but the screen, because, when you're focusing on whatever part of that brain that you need to strengthen, the screen then lights up or whatever. That's how I've always described it to people to kind of.
And that's really that's a perfect explanation, because it really is. I mean, EKG is an electrocardiogram, which is they're putting sensors around different places on your heart,
right, and
different parts of your body. So down in your feet, they put sensors. They put them at the extremities in your arms, because that electrical impulse from the heart is actually, I always forget it, whether it's 10 or 100 times more powerful than EEGs, which is a big difference. I should know that, but I don't, because I don't deal with hearts. But that signal is much stronger than an EEG signature. So EEG we're dealing with microvolts. So if you take let's say a 9-volt battery, you chop that into 9 pieces, you take one of those pieces and chop it up into 1,000 pieces, that's a microvolt. That's what we're listening to. So it's very small, tiny little impulses. So you need really expensive equipment, which is why neurofeedback, I think right now, is just a little bit more costly, because the cost for the providers and the people to do it is more expensive. Now, that leads me into, like, I think the biggest part about neurofeedback. I'm not knocking or saying that people that have only done neurofeedback for a couple of years are inexperienced, but I will tell you this: my mentor barely let me be around other human beings doing neurofeedback until I got really good at it. And I've been doing this for 24 years. And I'm still learning a lot of stuff.
So when, well, go ahead. I'm sorry. I have a question.
I was just going to say, so when you're looking for a provider, I don't know how far your reach is to outside Orlando, but make sure that you vet your neurofeedback provider, that they've got at least 7 years strictly doing neurofeedback. I'm not saying that it's somebody who's done this as a side job, or a chiropractor that adds this on to their practice, or, a doctor's office that has a technician that isn't overseen by somebody who's got a lot of experience. I've been doing this for 24 years, and I oversee 8 offices here in Orlando. Every technician that we have in any office is overseen directly by myself or one of my staff. I would never take a technician and plug them into an office and say, go do neurofeedback after a weekend workshop. And a lot of people do that. I've had doctors. I had one doctor in particular that's in Longwood. I won't say who she is, but she went to a workshop and she learned about neurofeedback. She bought like $20,000 worth of equipment and was told, okay, you're done. She went in and she was like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, because they don't teach you. There isn't really a lot out there besides basic neurofeedback training. Even the board certification is very surface level basic neurofeedback. It's not, you have to be monitored and mentored by somebody who's been doing this for a long time. So if anything, what I'm saying is that just vet your neurofeedback provider, make sure that they have at least 7 to 8 years experience doing this as what they do strictly. And this is all that I've done for the last 24 years. Again, my background's in mental health. I was a therapist for quite a long time as I was going through a lot of training in this, but I don't do counseling. I don't do therapy. I don't do, anything else that is not within my lane of neurofeedback and brain mapping. So I'm gonna get off my soapbox now, but I just want to make sure people know to vet your provider.
So is there a place they can go, like a website to go to find providers who maybe have like a certification or a proper, like, is there a place to go other than just asking, hey, how long have you been doing this, to kind of vet them better to know?
Yeah, there is. So the BCIA, so the Biofeedback Certification International Alliance, I think is what they are. They've changed their name a few times. The BCI, so BCIA.org, I believe, is the biofeedback certification. They're like a governing body for that. I'm not listed on there because I've been doing this for a long, long time, and
so you don't really need the money. You don't have to pay the money because you already have the credential, essentially. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and because. Yeah, with my clinical psychology degrees, I felt now. So a lot of people tell me that I should have it, which I probably should. But I've done what I've done. My mentor is one of the pioneers in the field. The certification, is just a piece of paper for me. But again, I mean, it really, and I'm not saying that I'm the exception to the rule, but when we were developed, so Dr. Suter, my mentor, has the New Mind Academy. When they were developing New Mind Academy, I mean, there was a whole process of developing that, even the database system. And Dr. Suter is the only person that has a BCI approved web course for the blueprint areas for board certification. So I always tell people that if the guy who wrote the board certification web course is your mentor,
right.
you're pretty well covered. But again, if I'm making myself out to be the exception to the rule, maybe I am, because my mentor is Dr. Richard Suter. I can say that. I mean, I've earned that right.
Yeah, I mean, if you're good, you're good, man. I mean, celebrating that, man. I mean, that's awesome.
So with oh God, brain fart.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a brain fart.
I know something that can help with that.
I do have an appointment.
Listen, Adrian, tell her.
The funny thing is, the irony in all this is I had to push Ian to let us get our son to do this. Even the first time.
I already told him this, all right?
But
it's hard. It's hard to dive into this because it's weird. I mean, when you first hear about it, it's like, you're going to do what to me? You're going to put sensors on my head? And you know what I always think back on? It's funny because I have, even if you guys ever use Bitmoji, but it's something on your phones that you can create these little emojis of yourself. But you guys remember Back to the Future? Remember Doc Brown when he answered the door and he had that big thing on his head, and he sticks the plunger on your forehead and is trying to figure out what you're thinking. I have friends one of my closest friends calls me the mad scientist because it just looks like something weird when you're putting sensors on somebody's head.
It does. And Ian was like, you can try it. I don't think it's going to work, but you can go ahead. And then he considered, after he saw Noah, he's like, you know what? I think I'm going to get it done too. And I was like, well, and the thing was, and now he's pushing me, and I was going to go, but I just put it off. But he's like, you need to go do this. And then before, he was so adamantly opposed to it.
I told Adrian this already. Adrian, listen, before I went to you, and people have to hear this.
Well, he was adamant, even, hold on one second, Ian. Because even as long as our son's been dealing with all this stuff, he was like trying to push me to medicate him. And I've always
you got to go back to old crap, man.
Well, no,
that was back in the day.
It's just because you weren't aware, right? I mean, you didn't know. So he was always pushing me to medicate our son. And I'm like, I'm not medicating him. There's other ways out there to help him. And I'm going to find those other ways.
Well, it's the telltale. Was it the age-old tale of, like, if all you have in your toolbox is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right. Yes. Yeah. But for me, it's been great to see him now realizing, there are other opportunities. And we were very close to actually medicating, because I just got finally tired of my husband. He was so frustrated with the whole thing. But then he talked to somebody and he decided not to. Thank God. But it's just to see his transformation, to see where now he's having that experience and seeing that, yes, there are other ways and they can help, and they've helped me. And for me, that's like, it's been great to see him have that more positive outlook towards things that aren't of medication to help our son.
Adrian, listen, if you want me to be a spokesman for you, just tell me in 2 seconds and I'll do it. Listen, man, when I came to you, my brain was all over the place, just very fog and just, Remember I told you that one day I came back to the office and I told you I didn't hear nothing driving home from work?
Yeah.
Not like I hear voices, but you know what I mean? It was all quiet up there. It was quiet. And I thought I was going
weird,
crazy.
right?
Yeah, I thought I was going crazy because
that's how people who have quote unquote regular brains, the way you're supposed to have your brain. That's how their mind is. But when yours is all clogged up, you have no idea.
Adrian, it's the weirdest experience. I drive home every day and nothing. There's nothing going on there. It's just clear as I can't even describe it, man. I mean, it's changed. And you even told me that was going to happen. You're like, it's going to really change the way you look at stuff. You can process stuff different.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm telling you, man, it works. Damn it.
I tell people, it's like, I don't know if it was you I was telling this the other day, but it's like, you ever had a computer that you have that just is running so slow because if you open up too many programs, it goes really slow? Yeah. So neurofeedback is an upgrade to that CPU. That little processor that allows you to run more applications more efficiently. And so I tell people all the time, it's kind of like upgrading your CPU, because if your CPU can run faster and process information much quicker, it can handle a lot more. And sometimes what it's doing is it's turning on filters. Your brain requires a lot of energy to run a lot of filtration systems. And that's what ADD is all about. That's why stimulants work. People go, why are you giving my kid that's had ADHD? Why are you giving him a stimulant? And the answer is because the filtration system that runs the filtering process to filter out all the other stuff that's going on isn't running correctly. So the stimulants increase the power output and to run those filters. And that's what neurofeedback does, but it does without medication. So it allows the brain to process and run filters that need power to filter stuff out, so that you can focus on nothing if you want to. And that's the other thing too, is if you're driving home from work and you're thinking about all the negative things, all the stress stuff, you're constantly thinking that stress response, that's unnecessary stress that you're dealing with all the time. Natalie. If you can turn those filters on and keep that stuff away, leave it at work, and you can drive home and come home and be a happy husband or a happy wife, or, all these things that you want to transition from work stress to home stress. Different kinds of stresses at home than there is at work. And you got to be able to have enough fuel to run those things, or else you start getting short fuses, you start arguing and fighting, you start nitpicking at little things. And that's what neurofeedback is really good at. It's good at regulating your stress response over time.
Adrian, you just described everything Natalie's gone through, like the last.
Hey, I got my appointment coming up. Damn.
Adrian, listen. I'm gonna make sure she comes to that first appointment, because if I don't stay on her ass, really, she's going to be late all the damn time.
Don't listen to him. My main goal, honestly, first main goal is to help with my cravings for food. Like
what that's like no, forget about your food cravings, man. Get your brain fixed. That's my first goal.
I'm like, look, I need to look at these cravings I got going on, and let's work on that. I need to lose weight. That'll help me.
Oh my God.
Well, we all know that food is something that releases dopamine, which is our feel-good neurotransmitter, right? So if we don't have enough of that, there's typically something that's pinging that to happen. So, we can, when we do the brain map, Natalie, we'll be able to kind of pick that apart.
Yes. Let's work on that.
Oh, this is getting too easy. But we're getting towards the end of the hour, Adrian. So, man, I'm so glad you're able to talk to us today, man. Thank you so much. And I think the information that you spoke about today is going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know about it. And I tell everybody as much as possible when if I talk about my son or if someone talks about their child having issues, I always, recommend 1, food dyes, 2, food dyes, preservatives, taking those out of your kids' diet.
Big time. Yeah.
And then, eat clean eating, and then the neurofeedback. Like that's something that I recommend and I tell people about. And there's so many ways, that are non-medical, non-prescription, I should say, that we can help kids who have these issues, and also adults and people who have anything in your brain that's going on, like you said, the anxiety, the ADHD, emotional, all these different things that are going on. That there is help out there, and in addition to whatever therapies you were doing, that this can also be part of your healing plan.
Absolutely. Yeah. Super key right there is complementary. So we tell people all the time that we have a couple websites, because we have our website that we have. And then, so as an organization, we've been Advanced Health and Performance, for many, many years. Advanced Health and Performance, or AHPI as we like to call it, has developed Neurologics, which is our neurologics program. So we have the ahpinstitute.com website, which is our clinic website.
But then we also have our new site, which is neurologics.com, and that's neurologix.com, neurologics.com. And you can go on that site, and it has a bunch of different things about neurofeedback. I believe there's articles and stuff like that too, but it also has a list of the offices that we work with directly. And I think there's 8 of them listed on there. Some of them, because of COVID, have fallen off. So if you get a hold of them and they're not operating, just move on to the next one. But the main offices right now that we work directly with are Dr. Alicia Braccia's office in Lake Mary. That's the Center for Health, Learning, and Achievement in Lake Mary. And then Dr. Stephen D'Antonio's practice, Whole Family Healthcare. You can go to wholefamilyhealthcare.com, and you can find us there as well too. And they'll talk about the neurofeedback and all the other integrative services that they offer, which is phenomenal.
We're trying to get him on the show. I hope I'm gonna make sure he listens. And
he's dodging, man.
He's dodging, so we're gonna try to get him.
Oh no! I like I tell people all the time, like if I send my family and like I send my friends there because I know that they're going to get results from there. And Dr. D'Antonio, and I hope does hear this now because he's going to just crack up at how much I'm plugging him. But it's just he's got a skill and a tool that is just phenomenal. If you've never done a Zyto scan,
yes, I've done them. Yeah. I go to his office. I'm trying to get him to come on.
I go there too. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know he did all that stuff. We just met him. He was our kid's soccer coach. That's how we met him. But
it reveals your soul. Like it's amazing.
I don't like it.
Yeah. So we definitely hope to get him on to talk about the Zyto scan. For me, I do prescribe to a little bit more natural health.
Well, and they have everything there. I mean, they've got an integrated pharmacy that has they call it a natural pharmacy because everything in there like are products from like some of the best nutraceutical companies in the world, like Zymogen, Designs for Health.
Right.
That's just some of them that are there, but those are the ones that we use, and that's because those are physicians' lines of supplements, and that's super important because anything off the shelf. If you ever read the New York Attorney General's article on supplementation, they took DNA samples from a bunch of stuff they took off the shelf, and they were lucky to find 18 to like 25% of the DNA inside of what was labeled on the outside.
Right. Yeah. Tell people
that's over the counter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't take over the counter stuff. Not too good.
Oh yeah. So physicians' lines are by far superior. They're a little bit more expensive, but the absorption is way better. Like Zymogen products. They are 100. Whatever they bring into the building is already in this methylated form. And methylated nutraceuticals quickly absorb into the body. They don't have to be converted. So, anyways, another topic, another day. Dr. D can touch on that like crazy. So, thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So, can you tell us your website again and the work, how people can find you?
Yeah. So, they can go to either site, which is Advanced Health and Performance, which is ahpinstitute.com. Or our site for our partners, which is the offices we have in and around Orlando and in Sarasota. And that's neurologix.com. That's neurologix.com.
All right.
Thanks, Adrian. We
And do you have a number to call your office number?
Any of those office numbers, they can reach or get a hold of me. For the most part, we pretty much just go through the offices to get all the scheduling and things down because they have a list of things that they have for people if they have questions. And then if there's advanced questions, they can get a hold of me directly. So, but most of the time they can field all the questions to get people started.
All right.
Thank you. You can join the Family Mess on your streaming podcast, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, iTunes, Spreaker, Spotify, Facebook, The Family Mess Podcast, Instagram, The Family Mess. Thank you, Adrian. We'll talk to you soon, buddy. Take care. Have fun.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
All right.
Oh,
Mess, Family Mess.